Good evening, friends, and shalom, and blessings to you all. Welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times. And this, of course, is exclusively on the Synagogue News. Want to remind you guys to think like a Neanderthal. Go ahead and own those titles that your enemies give you because, hey, somebody's got to own them. It might as well be you. We got an interesting show for you here today. Hopefully we're going to be in and out in the hour like we try to do, but we'll actually, of course, see what ends up happening. For our pre-article discussion at the moment, I wanted to go ahead and say a couple of things. Not so much a discussion per se, as much as it is just sort of a general announcement about some things that I wanted to say to you guys. So first off, I wanted to say, and I've said this before, but I just want to say it again. If anybody knows people who are interested in helping me set up merch as well as set up intros and outros for this show, I am definitely looking for people to help me out with that kind of stuff. I definitely want to have the rights to these different things on my own. So if anybody is interested in that, I am absolutely willing to pay you for your services to make sure that all of that is fine and dandy and legal and all that kind of stuff. But I really want to move this in the direction of selling merch, of having a sort of blog that you guys can go to daily to get some thoughts on whatever topic I happen to write about, of getting intros and outros and different sound effects and all that other kind of stuff, right? Of just basically generally making this a more improved, higher quality show. And so if anybody wants to help out with that, of course, like I said, I would be willing to pay for services. Please do feel free to hit me up at any point in time, comment either in the live chat or in the comment section. And yeah, just want to make sure that we're getting this, to a point where people are taking it more seriously, that it looks legit, right? We already have a lot of that already going for us, with the logos, with the little, what would you call that? I guess theme thing that we got going on here, right? There's a lot of things that make this pretty decent quality, but we obviously want to be improving. We'll never get to perfect, which means we'll constantly be improving, Lord willing. So that's kind of what I wanted to say with that. I also just wanted to briefly say, if I have any of my Christian brothers and sisters watching this today, I just have a good friend of mine named Mr. Phil Fox that I want to ask you guys to say prayers for. I know not everybody who watches this is religious, but those of you who are, just please keep him in your thoughts and prayers. And of course, we want to make sure that everything's going well and that kind of stuff. I can't give you guys a lot of the details because it's personal information, but the point is that he certainly needs that kind of stuff. So I'd like to just put him in the thought process, if you will. I'm wording everything terribly and inarticulately, but nonetheless, I do see Cryptomaria and the Trusty 8 podcast are in the live chat today. Thank you both for being here. We got an interesting show for you today. That's pretty much all I got as far as pre-article discussions. So let me go ahead and get my screen shared, and we will get right into our program for this evening. Just one moment. Just want to say, by the way, I appreciate that very much, Mr. Trusty Ape. I know. By the way, just so you know, I know your real name. I don't know if you want me using it, so just drop a thumbs up or thumbs down if you don't want me or do want me calling you by your real name, because I don't want to. If you change the name of the podcast to avoid that, then I don't want to start using it. But I do remember who you are, just so you're aware. I'm not lost on that. But regardless, I got an interesting program here for you guys. So let's go ahead and get this. I got to get my camera plugged in. Sorry. He says, yes, that's fine. All right. Awesome. Just one moment while I get this camera plugged in. Sorry. I should have started this a little bit more prepared, but All right, there we are. And it doesn't even look like my good camera is there we are. All right. He's just got my other channel removed by virtue of my own ignorance. Man, we all kind of are experiencing some of that, aren't we? But excuse me. Nonetheless, let's go ahead and jump into our program for today, friends. I appreciate every single one of you who is here. The first thing we have to talk about for today is a case that we have been keeping up with since it originally came to the media's attention, and that is the Reverend Tony Spell case. For those of you who don't know, need a little bit of a refresher, Reverend Tony Spell is a pastor in Louisiana who has been under a good deal of scrutiny and has also been legally charged with a couple of crimes for basically ignoring the Louisiana state COVID mandates and continuing to have church services at near or full capacity during the peak of the pandemic, right? His argument was, of course, that the First Amendment gives you the right to assemble peaceably and does not put any qualifiers on that. And also that the First Amendment gives you the right to worship as you see fit and to worship your, to worship your God, to separate church and state, as people famously say, although that quote itself is not actually found in the Constitution. But nonetheless, that's a good way to sort of sum up the basic idea that is trying to be communicated, right? The church is separated from the state, meaning the state can't encroach upon what the church does. And also the state is separated from the church, meaning that the church can't demand the state do this or that thing, right? Pretty awesome system there as far as I'm concerned, but not the point. The point is, those were his arguments. And of course, the Louisiana state government basically said, no, sorry, we don't actually think that you do have this right. And so they ended up charging him with a couple of crimes. I think he had 6 separate counts, each one having a total of about 6 years in county jail and $500 fine. So in total, he could be incarcerated for a max of 3 years with a $3,000 fine. Now, I'm not sure how Louisiana state law would work in that case, if he'd spend the whole 3 years in county jail, or if they would actually take him to some kind of a minimum security prison or something like that. I know in the state that I live in, once you are incarcerated for longer than a year, they don't keep you in a county jail anymore. But regardless, that is the details of what exactly is going on. And we have a recent development today in that case, which is that his lawsuit against the state of Louisiana has actually been rejected by a Louisiana state judge. Now, I want to be clear here real quick, just so you guys are aware. This is not the case we were talking about a couple days ago, where he's actually challenging the constitutionality of these mandates and taking it to the Louisiana State Supreme Court. That has not yet happened. This is not that case. It is related to that case. This is basically Tony Spell's attack, if you will, trying to get some sort of damages for what he's done or for what has been done to him, right? And all these other sorts of things. So related, obviously, but not the exact same case. So just want to make that clear so you guys are aware. This is not over. The actual case that's going to the Louisiana Supreme Court has not happened yet. Everything should be, all the paperwork, should be filed by January the 21st. That doesn't mean we'll have a date by January the 21st. It just means that everybody will have everything in writing at that point in time, right? But nonetheless, let's go ahead and jump right into the article here today. Court dismisses Louisiana pastor's virus restrictions suit. This comes from the Independent. I actually did go ahead and register for the Independent, so we don't have that little mishap that we had last time. So should have the full article here, just like the first time that I read it. But nonetheless, oh, look, they got a little Syrian, or not a Syrian. It is actually an Assyrian, but a little Syriac flag there. Anyways, sorry. Court dismisses Louisiana pastor's virus restrictions suit. A federal court has again rejected a Louisiana pastor's lawsuit over Governor John Bel Edwards' past COVID-19 restrictions on public gatherings. And this was actually published today. This whole situation took place today, as far as the dismissal of this case took place today. I guess this would probably be tomorrow if you're in Louisiana, because it's 11 o'clock where I am. And that means if you're Central or Eastern time, it's going to be obviously the next day, right? January the 13th. But nonetheless, this did take place on January the 12th, the same day we're airing this live. And again, this is published from the Independent originally. A Louisiana pastor's lawsuit over Governor John Bel Edwards' past COVID-19 restrictions on public gatherings was rejected for a second time Wednesday by a federal judge. U.S. District Judge Brian Jackson in Baton Rouge said the lawsuit by Tony Spell seeking an order blocking the restriction is moot because the restrictions expired long ago. And Jackson also rejected Spell's request for damages from state officials, which of course means that he doesn't think that Pastor Spell is actually entitled to any damages or compensation, meaning he probably thinks that the state of Louisiana acted within its legal rights. I definitely would disagree with that, but let's read a little further before I give you commentary. Spell garnered national attention in March 2020 when he began to flout the state's public health order at the time when much of the country was in lockdown over the emergence of COVID-19. Louisiana was being hit especially hard at the time, but hundreds showed up to hear Spell claim, that the virus was nothing to be concerned about. Now, it is interesting to note that this man has an incredibly large church that ballooned in what would you say, that attendance, right? Ballooned in attendance as soon as he actually started getting media attention for flouting COVID orders. And yet, to the best of my knowledge, only one person in his church has ever actually gotten sick, confirmed at least, with COVID-19. They've never had to shut down. They've never had a super spreader event. We're talking a church that has thousands of people in it. I'm not kidding. Literal thousands of people in it. This is a church that's so large, if you follow his YouTube page, which I do, this is a church that's so large that they actually have more than one service and sometimes have people actually outside of the church for service because there's not enough room inside of the church. This is a massive church, a mega church, if that word means anything at all. And yet, there has been no super spreader events linked to this continuous ongoing church service with no masks, with no vaccine requirements, with no social distancing, operating at or even greater than capacity, right? There's been no reports of mass death, mass sicknesses. I don't even think there's been one death. I could be wrong about that, but to the best of my knowledge, I recall one person got sick, but I don't remember anybody actually dying in his congregation. Of course, when you have upwards of 2,000 people attending, it's likely at least one did. But I don't recall one. And I have been keeping up with this story since it did happen. And to be honest with you, other than the Advocate, which is a local Louisiana paper down there in Central, I'm probably doing more reporting on this case than anybody in the country. That doesn't mean I'm right, but I'm just saying I have yet to hear of anybody dying in his congregation, right? And I find that to be incredibly interesting when you consider the fact that the reason for, as far as I'm concerned, violating this man's rights, right? And I would say this if it was a Jewish congregation or a Muslim congregation or a Buddhist congregation, if they have those sorts of things, right? This isn't just limited to the fact that it's my religion. But I think it is a violation of his rights. And the excuse that people are giving to violate these rights is that this is going to be a super spreader event. We're going to have mass death. Everybody's going to die. And you know, we're going to have all these terrible problems. Say goodbye to grandma. But it didn't happen, right? Here we are, 2022, almost 2 years in the future. It didn't happen, right? And actually, I don't know of any situations where a pastor who was flouting these rules openly actually had that situation happen. John MacArthur was going to church. He has a very large church, also could definitely be described reasonably as a mega church. No super spreader events there. I mean, he himself is an 80-plus-year-old man and appears to be perfectly fine, right? There was the, I can't remember the man's name, but a very large charismatic mega church from a prosperity preacher down in Florida that ended up being fine. The Altar up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, with former Representative Tim Remington as their pastor. They were fine, right? James Coates in Canada was fine. Arthur Pulowski in Canada was fine. I don't know of any churches. All of these are large, very large churches. That's why they actually get on the news, right? I don't know of any churches that, because of the fact that they've continued meeting weekly without social distancing requirements or vaccine requirements or masking requirements, I don't know of any of these churches that have actually had a super spreader event within their walls. I mean, you got to be honest. That's incredibly interesting, right? Especially when we're in a world where, or in a country, excuse me, where that's supposed to be something that you're allowed to do legally in two different ways: peaceably assemble and freedom of religion, right? It's literally enshrined in the law of the land. Like the original law of the land, even. It's not even like 11th, 12th, 13th kind of amendment. Like the actual original law of the land enshrines enshrines your right to do this 2 different times. And the excuse we have for violating these 2 different rights has been a big nothing burger. It went nowhere. What megachurch has been the site of a bunch of mass COVID death? I don't know of one. Right? Now, of course, you add on top of this the incredibly interesting thing that when it comes to political rallies, when it comes to protests, when it comes to sporting events, a lot of people were completely cool with it, or arbitrarily cool and not cool with it. It was one of the interesting things, right? Like, for example, sporting events were cool, but then they weren't cool, but then they were cool again, but then they're not cool, depending on what state you're in. It's kind of confusing. But what they can all kind of agree on is church not cool, right? I don't know. It's kind of a little suspicious to me, but whatever, right? What do I know? I personally think that with the benefit of hindsight, which is indeed 2020, we now know for a fact that these events, meaning church services, even at mega churches, without any restrictions whatsoever, are not threats to the community, are not threats to the congregations even. These people are fine. The communities in which they live are fine. Everybody's doing well. All things considered, this has not been a very big problem, right? In fact, it's been almost a non-problem. I don't know of a single megachurch that has actually been the epicenter of some kind of crazy super spreader event or something along those lines. Excuse me. Love apple cider. But regardless, let's go ahead and move on, because we're not talking about, of course, John MacArthur and Tim Remington and all these other people. We're talking about Tony Spell, who, because of the fact that he lives in the state of Louisiana, is actually still dealing with the legal repercussions of this, whereas all those other guys, for the most part, have actually gotten off scot-free, or in the case of James Coates in Canada, after serving some time in jail, did end up getting off scot-free. Louisiana, though, has just not been that way. Tony Spell is still fighting this in court. He will very likely have to take this to the United States Supreme Court. That's always been what I've thought since day one, and it appears now, I mean, once the Louisiana Supreme Court rules against him, which I'm almost positive they will, what do you have then? You literally only have the Supreme Court, right? So I think it'll happen for sure. He might have I guess maybe an appeals court, a district appeals court that I might be missing. But regardless, I think you'll see this in the Supreme Court either 2022 or 2023, absolutely. But moving forward, Jackson first rejected the lawsuit in November 2020. The following July, a panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans ruled that the judge should look at the case again in light of 3 recent Supreme Court opinions blocking some restrictions on indoor worship in New York and California. We've actually done previous episodes on that if you guys are interested. The panel stressed that it wasn't ruling on the merits of the case. After reviewing the case again, Jackson has again dismissed the lawsuit. Quote, plaintiff's demands for damages fails because there is not now and never has been a clearly established right to unrestricted religious assembly, and at all relevant times, defendants reasonably believed that they were acting within the constitutional limits set by the Supreme Court and the Fifth Circuit, end quote, Jackson wrote. Now, I entirely disagree with this. It's very clearly enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution, right? In fact, let's just go ahead and read the First Amendment of the Constitution. So let me go ahead and pull that up here. First Amendment. And we'll stop this screen share. Actually, no, I think the screen share is still up. Yeah, because I'm actually sharing my whole screen. So yeah, we'll go to the First Amendment. We'll go ahead and read this text and see what it says. And you tell me if this judge is actually being honest, and if the state of Louisiana could actually read this text and reasonably think that they were within constitutional bounds. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. By the way, if anybody wants to say, oh, it says specifically Congress, we have Supreme Court cases that have ruled the Bill of Rights are not negotiable on the state or city level. The federal government is to defend these rights, which means also potentially defending them from other smaller governments. That has been decided numerous times in court. You may not agree with that, but just so you know, that is the law of the land as it's currently established today. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay. Full stop. Period. No asterisk. Shall not have laws prohibiting the free exercise thereof. If you are prohibiting people's ability to go to church, that is quite literally prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's like one of the major pillars of being a Christian is going to church, along with praying and Bible reading. Like, honestly, I don't understand how you could possibly read this and think, yeah, no, I can totally shut down churches at a whim based on little to no evidence whatsoever. By the way, with the benefit of hindsight, turned out I was wrong. Can totally shut that kind of stuff down according to this document, according to what this document says. Now, you may disagree with that, but we're not talking about what you disagree or agree with. We're talking about what this document says. But that's only the first time, because it says so again. Or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble. Twice. 2 different times, explicitly, this law says that, yes, you have an unrestricted right to religious assembly. You have an unrestricted right to the free exercise thereof of your religion, and you have an unrestricted right to peaceably assemble. 2 different times. This law says Tony Spell's totally in the clear. But this judge who went and got himself a $400,000 education to say this apparently can't see the plain English on the paper. I don't know. But anyways, back to the article here. Spell also is fighting state charges for the violation of pandemic-related gathering limits. And, of course, that is something that we will have to report on whenever there is more information to speak about there. But this particular case kind of lets us know where things are going. It's probably not going to end well for Pastor Spell in the Louisiana Supreme Court, right? The Louisiana judges and the federal appeals courts don't seem to be on his side. They don't seem to be on a lot of people's side. Obviously, some recent SCOTUS rulings, have suggested that maybe the tide could be turning from the top down. But as I have voiced to you guys numerous times, if you're consistent watchers, and if you're a new watcher, I'll just go ahead and let you know now. I, as a constitutional originalist and a traditionalist conservative, don't trust any of the 3 Trump appointees as far as I could throw them. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Barrett are neocons at best. And their understanding of the Constitution is certainly not as an originalist would understand it, right? They certainly see it, at least in some sense, as a living document, meaning as a document whose interpretation needs to be set in the context of the times, not necessarily in the explicit intentions of the writers, right? So I'm not convinced that they're going to actually rule on Pastor Spell's side if he does end up getting to the United States Supreme Court. I'm even less convinced that the Louisiana Supreme Court will rule on his side, though, because of the fact that consistently Louisiana courts have been against Pastor Spell. This is just another instance of this where they're saying, look, there is no unrestricted right to religious assembly, even though that's very clearly not true according to the First Amendment of the Constitution, and very clearly not true according to the numerous Supreme Court cases which have ruled that state and city governments do not have a right to violate the Bill of Rights. Just because it says specifically the federal government doesn't mean it's limited to the federal government. It's talking about any government within the borders of the United States of America. But again, we can go into a deeper look into that at probably some other time. The point is, though, this is the logic that they're using, and I don't see it changing in the Louisiana Supreme Court. I think Pastor Spell will probably have to take this to the United States Supreme Court, and then I'm not even 100% sure that he's going to win. He should win. He absolutely should win, because there is nothing that ever should be illegal about a person having a church service whenever they decide to have a church service. You as the government do not have a right to tell me that I can't have a church service, period. Like, under any circumstances. That's just the way it is. If my church is on fire and I would like to go have a church service inside of that on fire church, that's my right, frankly, right? You as the government do not have a right to tell me otherwise. And by the way, for those of you who think, all right, well, I mean, that might be a little absurd. The government doesn't have a right to ever tell you. Go to the other countries across the world, the free countries across the world, and look at the so-called religious liberties that they have, and then come back to America and tell me that ours and the conservative interpretation of ours is too extreme, right? Go to France, where they ban girls wearing bikinis. Literally, Muslim girls cannot wear bikinis. You have to expose yourself sexually, which for them is incredibly shameful, right? By law in their school and public pools. Not kidding. Go look it up. Ban the burqa. Not allowed to wear it. Not kidding. Go look it up. Ban the hijab even, although they didn't actually end up getting that one passed. Thank God. I'm obviously not a Muslim, but I don't agree with the persecution of any people, even if it is small persecutions like this. That's happening in France. Free, first world, democratic France. Another perfect example is Israel. Look at what's going on to a lot of the Christians in Israel. Look what's going on with Messianic Jews and Karaite Jews and Reformed Jews in Israel, right? Because the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox have control of the Ministry of the Interior. They can decide what marriages are or are not legit, what conversions are or are not legit. They've even almost universally decided, or unilaterally, decided that Karaite Jews and Messianic Jews just aren't Jews. Yeah, I mean, forget the fact that you were born to Jewish parents and that this is clearly an ethnicity. You're just not Jews because we decided you're not Jews, right? Why? Because they don't like the religion they have. That's free, democratic, first world Israel, right? Canada, obviously, with the arresting of James Coates and Artur Pawlowski, Canada recently passing a bill saying that you're not actually allowed to counsel somebody on unwanted homosexual attraction, an adult. You're not allowed to counsel a willing adult on unwanted homosexual attraction. By the way, let's be perfectly clear here. We're not talking about, quote, conversion therapy. We are talking about a consenting adult going to his pastor, another consenting adult, and talking about sexual attractions that he himself does not like. Canada has made that illegal. First world, democratic, free. So tell me that American religious freedom is extreme, please. It's not. It's not even close. That's why we don't end up having situations where you're literally not allowed to go talk to your pastor about something that bothers you, or you're literally not allowed to wear the swimsuit of your choice in a public pool, right? We don't say, hey, you're not this ethnic group anymore because you don't actually have the right faith. Why? Because America has a very unique respect for religious liberty and for a lot of different liberties. And if you're living in the United States of America and you don't agree with these religious liberties, you should look at these other countries like France, like Israel, like Canada, like Mexico, like Peru, like Great Britain, Norway, all these other countries, Finland, right? These free countries. You should look at them and what they actually do to people who are not fitting in the status quo. And sure, it's not as bad as what the Chinese do. It's not as bad as what Adolf Hitler did. Vladimir Putin's got him beat. But that doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean you'd like it. And if I was the one doing it to y'all, you'd like it even less. You'd like it even less. Anyways, though, let's go ahead and jump to our next article today. Going to be talking now about Ammon Bundy, who is running for governor of the state of Idaho, my own state. Bundy 2022, by the way. Keep Idaho, Idaho. He also has a case that is moving forward, and we got some new news on that to report to you guys. This is from the Idaho Statesman, originally written by this woman here, Sally Krutzig. Ammon Bundy said charges were unconstitutional, and we'll explain the charges in the article. Judge denies dismissal and moves trial date. This is written January the 10th, so about 2 days ago from the time that this is airing live. Ooh, shoot. Got bots. Oh, I see Trusty Ape has been commenting quite a bit. Sorry, Kevin, I haven't been paying attention. The only reason I'm even seeing this person here is just because they are shoot. Didn't even actually block them too. I just blocked them with one particular channel because I guess that channel doesn't have a wrench. I will interact with some of the stuff that you are saying here in a moment. Actually, I will address this real quick because controversial opinion, I am very fundamentalist. I am very Christian. I am very conservative. However, as illegitimate as I think homosexual and polyamorous marriages are, I don't think that the state actually has the right to tell somebody what they can and can't do in their own bedroom. I don't think that is the Constitution does not allow for that, basically. So I'm actually in this particular area not quite on board with a lot of the people who share my side of the aisle. I still think it's sinful. I still think it's wrong. I still think that society as a whole should not endorse these things. But as far as what should be legal, there is no constitutional basis, in my opinion, to restrict people's sexual behaviors so long as there are consenting adults in the mix. Now, that said, I do believe that the private institutions that marry individuals should have the right to reject a person's appeal to be married, right? In other words, if you're in an area that's ultra conservative and none of the churches around will marry you, well, I don't think the state should tell them they have to. At the same time, if you still decide to live with somebody anyways, I don't think the state should have the right to tell you that you can't. Yeah. So, believe it or not, I actually am not as hardlined on that as you might have thought originally. But at any rate, let's go ahead and jump to this new article here. The legal proceedings for, quote, far-right activist and Idaho governor candidate Ammon Bundy will be stretched out a little longer after Ada County Magistrate Judge Kira Dale denied Bundy's motion to stay and motion to dismiss at a status hearing on Monday afternoon. Excuse me. That would be Monday, January the 10th, by the way. His jury trial, which was set to begin Thursday, that's actually tomorrow. It has been moved, so it's not actually relevant anymore, but that's actually tomorrow. I totally didn't realize that the first time I read through this. Anyways, his jury trial, which was set to begin Thursday, has been moved to 8:15 a.m. on March the 14th. The trial will cover Bundy's trespassing charges from April the 8th, 2021, when he was arrested twice in one day for entering the Idaho Capitol. At the time, he was under a one-year ban from the building after he was arrested in August of 2020 for refusing to leave the State House Lincoln Auditorium during a special legislative session. That arrest led to his conviction on 2 misdemeanor charges. At Monday's hearing, Bundy attorney, I don't know why I said Bundy's order, that was just total dyslexic moment there. Anyways, Bundy attorney Seth Diviny, anyways, tried to argue that the ban from the State House was unconstitutional. Divvy said Idaho Department of Administration Director Keith Reynolds did not have the authority to revoke Bundy's access. The judge disagreed. It's denied now because there just isn't enough of a basis for it, Dale said of the dismissal motion. The March trial will be Bundy's second in 9 months. Late July, a jury found Bundy guilty of misdemeanor trespassing and resisting or obstructing officers related to the Lincoln Auditorium arrest. He was sentenced to 40 hours of community service and $1,089 in fines. Bundy, who is running in the Republican primary for governor, has argued that his voluntary Idaho gubernatorial campaign stops satisfy his court-mandated community service connected to the conviction, the Idaho statesman previously reported. Big fan of Bundy, but I don't know actually necessarily how that works. Maybe somebody could explain that better to me. I'm just not aware how that would suffice community service rules. But anyways, Dale said she will be issuing a written ruling on her decision at Monday's hearing. And that's the end of that article there. Another pretty short one. So, what I'll say on this particular issue, the Ammon Bundy issue, is he did absolutely commit an act of civil disobedience. And that, obviously, as all acts of civil disobedience, what he did is against the law. Namely, he was trespassing on government property, and he was resisting arrest once they tried to arrest him. In fact, the picture of him resisting arrest is absolutely hilarious. He refused to get out of the chair, so they arrested him with his hands behind his back on the chair so that he was stuck to the chair, and then literally wheeled him out of the courthouse. Absolutely hilarious pictures there, to be honest with you. As somebody who's a Bundy fan, I found it to be hilarious in a good way, but I'm sure a lot of people probably found it mockable. But the point that I'm making here is just to say Bundy probably will be found guilty. He already has been found guilty for those 2 misdemeanor charges, and there's really no reason for him not to be. In the same way that Martin Luther King Jr. was very often found guilty, even though he was doing things that were right. And I'm not necessarily comparing the two per se. I'm just saying in acts of civil disobedience, you have people who are doing things that are right, but they are against the law. That's sort of the point. That's why you're doing it, right? And you end up facing the legal consequences of that. Martin Luther King, of course, did, and Ammon Bundy likely will. He already has faced many. That said, I'm 100% with Mr. Bundy in this regard. And in fact, I'm 100% with Mr. Bundy in many regards, to be honest with you. But in this particular regard, I'm 100% with him as far as the protests of the mask mandates and of the shutdown of the economy and of the vaccine mandates. Now, Bundy is a honest constitutionalist, so he, like myself, does have some caveats. Like, for example, a independent private company does actually have the right to tell you you have to get a vaccine to work for them. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but that is true. That under our United States Constitution, that's absolutely true. You have a private company. You have every right to do with that private company what you see fit, so long as you are not committing a crime against another person or somehow violating their liberties as expressed and codified in the United States Constitution or your state constitution, right? But as far as county-wide mandates, city-wide mandates, statewide mandates, countrywide mandates, that's something that is just simply not allowed by the United States Constitution. Different state constitutions are going to vary, but the United States Constitution is certainly not a document that gives you the ability to just temporarily say, hey, you know what, liberties be damned, your ability to provide for yourself be damned, your ability to go out and worship be damned, your ability to go out and vote be damned, all these different things be damned because of a disease that we don't actually know is going to be as bad as we think. And by the way, once again, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm not even talking about the conspiracy theories at this point. I'm just talking about taking the numbers at face value. Okay. 1.7 million Americans did not die in 2020. The numbers were wrong. We have to agree to that now because we live in 2022 and that just simply didn't happen. Right? Now you can say anything beyond that, like, okay, maybe it was still a very big deal and yada, 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 so on and so forth. We can have that kind of conversation. But the justification for the lockdowns was wrong. It was simply not true. 1.7 million, 2020 didn't happen. We didn't even get a third of that, right? So we obviously need to take that kind of thing into account when we're now retroactively looking at all these different situations where people were saying, hey, you're violating our liberties. You're going to, seriously damage all the different students in college, high school, middle school, and the different, scholastic grades, whatever it happens to be. You're going to seriously damage them by just completely removing a year plus of their education. You're damaging a whole lot of companies. You're damaging people's livelihoods, obviously restricting people's liberties. You're not allowed to do this, and you don't even know that what you're saying is actually going to come to fruition. And now we live in 2022, and it didn't come to fruition, right? You can't say that anybody who was saying that this was overblown in the past, you can't actually tell them that they were over-exaggerating or that they were wrong or that they were being conspiracy theorists because it's January 2022 now, and we know better. And is it a bigger deal than some people suggested if the numbers are to be trusted? Yes, of course. But is it a smaller deal than basically every single one of the major experts said? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's just a fact. That's just a fact, right? And again, this was used as justification to completely destroy an entire generation of kids' schooling, to wipe out tons and tons and tons of small businesses, get the rich richer while the poor got poorer, to put in jeopardy everybody's livelihoods as far as their ability to pay rent and also just the rent itself, right? I mean, that ballooned. So not only are you getting less money, but you also have to pay more money in order to live in the same place, right? Also the inflation that has happened as a result. All of these different incredibly bad and negative issues. And we are now looking back in hindsight saying, look, you said 1.7 million. We didn't even have one. We didn't even have 500,000 the first year, right? In fact, if you take into account the fact that the CDC said that the numbers were inflated by as much as 35%, the CDC said that, not Alex Jones, okay? Then even the official numbers you have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. And again, that's just a simply acknowledged fact. In fact, who remembers George Floyd? Everybody had to specify George Floyd. Yes, he had COVID, but he didn't die of COVID. because they knew that people were taking everybody who died of COVID and saying, hey, they had COVID, or everybody who died with COVID, saying, hey, they had COVID, therefore we're going to list COVID as the cause of death. And why were they doing that? Well, you get $39,000 from the United States federal government every time somebody with COVID dies in your hospital. What kind of nonsense is that? But regardless, here we are in 2022, 1.7 million didn't die. 1 million didn't even die. We didn't even get half of that number. Is that a good thing? Of course it is. But the point is, this was used as justification to violate people's liberties, to destroy a generation of students, and to completely eliminate the small business in certain areas of the world, like, for example, New York City, where upwards of 80% of small businesses died, while two different men, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, crossed over the $200 billion mark. And I'm not even saying that that's necessarily a problem. Obviously, I'm not a socialist, right? They earn that money. They can keep that money. But isn't it ironic that we have this complete obliteration of small businesses, right? And what happens to the richest of the rich? They get richer. They get richer. They reach heights that we didn't think they could reach in the modern day. And we know better now. We absolutely, positively know better now. You can't argue anymore this was going to be the Spanish flu, because it wasn't the Spanish flu. And all the areas that refused to lock down, by the way, like Wyoming, for example, South Dakota, for example, perfectly fine. All the areas that did lock down, like Illinois, for example, California, for example, New York, for example, hit harder than anybody else. That may or may not be a coincidence, but the point is the lockdowns didn't work. We also know better in that regard. So we know it wasn't going to kill all the people that it was said to have killed, because it didn't. And we also know the lockdowns didn't work because those who were hit hardest locked down, and severely. And those who did not get hit hardest did not lock down, did not have mask mandates, do not have vaccine mandates. It's just the facts. You can deal with the facts or you can not deal with the facts, but these are the facts. All right, next article that we are going to read today. Ooh, I see another one of these unpleasant folks. I don't know why there are so many bots in the world, but they just, I don't know. People just make these bots for no reason. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not made by people. I guess I don't know where bots come from. I don't know why they even do what they do. The point is well, I can't even talk. The point is, it is annoying, though. At any rate, we got more vaccine news. More vaccine news. This is the last thing we're going to be talking about as far as the vaccine is concerned. Pope Francis, on top of denouncing cancel culture, has said that getting the vaccine is actually a moral obligation. Now, to be fair, he said it in a roundabout way. He said that getting the vaccine was essential health care, and that health care was a moral obligation. Speaking of the individual to keep themselves healthy, not of the governments to provide health care. Although he does also believe that that is a moral obligation. So, you know, in a sense, it's not like he would have been opposed to that, but that isn't what he was saying, right? But yeah, he's recently come out and said, hey, it's a moral obligation. You need to get vaccines, get the vaccine if you care for your, neighbor, and give them all the love and kumbaya and all that other kind of nonsense. And the reason that I find this incredibly important is because he hasn't said anything ex cathedra, which means from his chair as the head of all Christians for moral and spiritual matters, meaning this is not an infallible proclamation on behalf of the Catholic Church. But it is interesting that he has used the words moral obligation because he is considered to be the prime and supreme leader of all Christians. If you're Catholic, at least, this is what you believe, right? And actually, if you're Orthodox too, this is partially true for you as well. Although he's first among equals, not the supreme pontiff. But he is said to be, if you're Catholic, the supreme pontiff, the primate, as they say, And he is supposed to be the leader of all Christians at all places in issues that regard moral, theological, spiritual matters, right? Notice the first one of those things is moral. So even though he didn't say this ex cathedra, even though he didn't say this in a way that would give dogmatic papal infallibility behind it, or give dogmatic papal infallibility to prop it up, I guess would be a better way of putting it. He did still say this in such a way that is very interesting to me, and which I think definitely is trying to use his position as somewhat of a bully pulpit, so to speak, for Catholics in particular, of course. But nonetheless, let's read a little bit about what he had to say. This is originally from the Wall Street Journal, written by Francis Roca. Pope Francis denounces cancel culture and anti-vaccine ideology. Pontiff also warned of children's social isolation from school closures during the pandemic. So see this, they do this all the time. I don't understand why these articles do this. They let me read it, and then I go back to set up my show, and then I come back to the article, and it says I have to subscribe. And it's like, then why did you let me read it 5 minutes ago? I guess, obviously, it's not literally 5 minutes ago. It's an hour ago. But it's still very frustrating. Still very frustrating. It's like I have to triple check every single time that I'm reading one of these articles. But anyways, that's what he said. Let's just move on. Let's not hear me rant, and let's just move on. Pope Francis thinks it's a moral obligation, and I have some interesting things to say about it. And I already said them. So, next. What's happening in the Middle East? Interesting things, for sure. Interesting things. This from The Hill originally. The U.S. is on the sidelines of a historic transformation in the Middle East. Again, it says the U.S. is on the sidelines of a historic transformation in the Middle East. This article is originally from Mark Green, and again, published by The Hill. No, not interested. On December the 13th, an Israeli prime minister visited the capital of the United Arab Emirates to meet with its de facto ruler for the first time. We actually talked a little bit about that last year, if you guys are interested. Historic in its own right, Prime Minister Bennett's trip took place within the context of a seismic political realignment underway in the Middle East that is happening despite a marked lack of American engagement. And the interesting thing about this is, even though there is a lack of American engagement right now, it's American engagement by virtue of Trump's Abraham Accords that actually kicked off this whole thing to begin with. So kind of an interesting turn of events there. But I digress. This is a tragic missed opportunity, as the United States must embrace the role it has played in bringing about this change, or we will be left behind, says the person writing this article, Mr. Mark Green. A little over a year ago, with bipartisan support from Congress, the Trump administration brokered the Abraham Accords, in which the UAE and Bahrain actually became the first Arab states to normalize relations with Israel since Jordan did so in 1994. By January 2021, Morocco and Sudan had also joined the group. And the U.S. could proudly claim to have tripled the number of Arab states fully recognizing Israel within just 5 months. Before then, only the aforementioned Jordan and also, Egypt actually formally recognized Israel. Egypt being the first to do so from the Camp David Accords back in 1979. The Biden administration initially, while paying lip service to the Abraham Accords, made it clear that it had no interest in furthering the political integration of the Middle East, instead focusing on seeking a renewed Iran nuclear deal. The administration's rhetoric on the Accords has been improved lately, but the palpable momentum from a year ago has been lost. Yet the Middle East is moving on with or without us. As Bennett's visit to the UAE highlighted, the Abraham Accords are alive and well and could not have come together at a better time. The Abraham Accords opened a flood of investment, with bilateral trade between Israel and the UAE increasing tenfold to $874.5 million US in just the first 10 months of 2021. Dozens of memoranda of understanding have been signed. Negotiations over a free trade agreement have begun, And the Emirati Minister of Economy has predicted a staggering $1 trillion in trade between the new countries in the next decade. Commercial flights now crisscross from the skies between Abu Dhabi, Tel Aviv, Manama, and Marrakesh. Now, this is an interesting development because on one end, of course, it is good to see Arab countries and the state of Israel seeming to get along. On another end, this is not an alliance of any true value, right? This is what we call co-belligerency. That is to say that both of these countries actually hate the same people and have the same interests in the region as a result. Now, which people in particular do they hate? Well, it's one person here, and it's Iran, right? And it's the same reason why Saudi Arabia has been very buddy-buddy with Israel as of the last 6 or 7 years as well. It's because they don't like Iran. Turkey is also seen as somewhat of a threat to stability in the Middle East. But really, the big kahuna, if you will, is definitely Iran. Iran is known to fund numerous different terrorist groups, for example, Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran is itself thought of as being a terrorist state, although it is somewhat ironic that the Saudis are the ones who are against them, considering they also have an incredibly strict and brutal interpretation of Islam that rules their country. Excuse me. But regardless, the Iran nuclear deal of 2015 actually put the Middle East on, on high alert in such a way that some of these different, long-standing feuds seem to be melting more and more. The ice that separates them, if you will, seems to be melting. And these people seem to be coming together to say, hey, the enemy of my enemy may not be my friend, but they can certainly be a partner for now, right? And that's what you actually see happening right now here in the Middle East. It just so happens that is also having a reverberating effect when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because, of course, that's of great interest to the different Arab states and Muslim states. And Israel obviously has got to deal with this situation. It's had to deal with this situation since 1948 when it was established. And as a result, you've been seeing a lot of heightened focus by the United States, by Israel, by the United Nations on the Palestinian-Israeli issue in ways that you probably haven't seen since the 80s or 90s when you had intifadas happening all the time. Excuse me. Now, what exactly is going to be the result of this? I don't personally know. It does seem likely to me that there will at least be a Cold War between one side that is the Arab Gulf states aligned with Israel and another side that is Iran, probably aligned with a Taliban Afghanistan. China, Russia, Turkey would probably be involved there as well. More out of it, kind of the same actually as the Saudis and the UAE making friendship with Israel, right? It's not like the Chinese and the Taliban are like super friendly with each other, or that Iran and Turkey are super friendly with each other, or that Russia really likes what China does, or any of these other kinds of things, right? But once again, it's a situation where they hate the same people, right? And it can be incredibly useful to be partners with somebody who hates the same people that you do. Just ask the Allied powers during World War II, which is, in fact, where the term co-belligerence comes from, right? The United States and Britain were obviously not too fond of the Soviet Union, right? But we both hated the same guys, namely Nazi Germany and imperialist Japan. And you could throw fascist Italy in there as well, but nobody really cares about them. And as a result, we signed alliance with each other and we fought the people that we fought, and it worked out very well for us, meaning we won, right? That's really what's going on here. And it's what's going on both sides, right? Again, China is not super buddy-buddy with Russia, who's not super buddy-buddy with Turkey, who's not super buddy-buddy with Iran. But all of these people hate the same groups of people, much like Saudi Arabia and Israel and the UAE hate the same groups of people in the aforementioned Turkey and Iran and Afghanistan, and so on. Now, will this Cold War result in some sort of deep friendship? I don't believe so. I think that the situation in the Middle East, there's too much historical baggage, for one. For two, there's too much religious baggage. It is literally a part of the fundamentalist interpretation of Islam, which fundamentalist, let's just be clear here, the fundamentalist interpretation of any religion is the right interpretation of that religion, right? Fundamentalism, literally by definition, is a strict adherence to the principles of faith. You call Christian fundamentalists because they take the Bible really seriously. You call Muslim fundamentalists because they take the Quran really seriously. Buddhist fundamentalists, likewise, because they take the principles of Buddhism very seriously. It is not a word that is interchangeable with extremism or with terrorism. It can be. In the case of Islam, it usually is, because Islam has the concept of jihad. And in some other situations, you can have that as well, like Jewish fundamentalism in the Holy Land is very prone to having terroristic groups due to the literal interpretations of things like Phineas killing a woman in the camp, as well as the man who went in under her, and Joshua's literal extermination of the people in the land, and all these other different kinds of things, right? But nonetheless, fundamentalism is not exclusively something that has anything to do with violence. For example, a Jainist fundamentalist would be diametrically opposed to violence, because the fundamentals of Jainism say that you can't even kill animals, let alone human beings, right? But that said, anti-Semitism is just an inherent part of Islamic fundamentalism, right? There's even a famous hadith, and it's a Sahih hadith, which means true. It's actually the strongest that it can be. And it says quite plainly, there will come a time at the end when the Muslims will go and slay all the Jews, and the Jews will run and hide behind a rock or a tree. And the rock of the tree will say, Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and slay him. And then there's some like special tree that for whatever reason is like the tree of the Jews, and it doesn't actually say come and slay him. But regardless, this isn't a show on Islamic theology, right? The point is, these hatreds, I think, run too deep. They're too ingrained in people religiously, culturally, historically. And so I don't actually think that this will end up creating any sort of long-term peace. I think it'll create a faux peace for sure. I think we'll probably have a situation where everybody's shaking hands and smiling and giving each other awards and, saying all the great and wonderful floofy things that they like to say about people who are their friends, right? The prime minister of Israel will go to Mecca and say something or do something, or he'll go to Riyadh, he'll go to Abu Dhabi, all that other kind of stuff. The king of Saudi Arabia will go to the Temple Mount and do whatever it is that he wants to do and speak with the Jewish people in Jerusalem. And it's all going to look like there's peace, right? But I don't think there actually will be. I think this is one of those things that, and of course, this happens all the time throughout history, where the politicians are going to be saying one thing because they have a certain agenda, namely they want to reduce the geopolitical power of Iran in the region, as well as a few other countries. And the actual populations, the countries, the boots on the ground, if you will, are going to be saying and feeling a completely different thing. And I think that's likely what we're actually going to have be the case here. But nonetheless. I had a little bit of a reboot there. Sorry. Yet the Middle East is moving on with or without us. Just read that. Sorry. The economic integration has now extended to Jordan, an earlier beneficiary of a peace treaty with Israel, with the signing of a with the signing in November of a trilateral water and energy deal. The UAE will build a solar power plant in Jordan to export energy to Israel for $180 million a year, and in return, Israel will send 200 million cubic meters of water to Jordan. Israel is thereby able to further its clean energy goals while applying its expertise in desalination to help address Jordan's looming water crisis. The unsettled resolution of a two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians continues to complicate relations between Israel and Jordan, but warming regional ties have allowed the two neighbors to seize a win-win opportunity to address existential water and economic challenges, and that will, mark my words, lead them to eventually, quote, solving the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And again, you've heard me say it 100 times if you watch this show consistently, but I'm going to say it again. I think that what they're actually going to do to solve that is they're probably going to build, first off, I think they're going to build a third Jewish temple parallel to the Dome of the Rock, not actually on it. I think, number two, they're going to internationalize the old city so that it's used probably as the headquarters for a new United Nations of religions, which is something that people have definitely been working on. That's not a conspiracy theory, just so you know. This isn't like www.thenewworldorder.com or something like that, right? This is something that Pope Francis has been actively working towards at least since September of 2014, as well as numerous others, right? Look up things like the World Alliance of Religions for Peace and stuff of that nature. Number 3, I think they'll split the remaining parts of the city, East Jerusalem going to the Palestinians and West Jerusalem going to the Jews, both of them getting those respective cities as a capital, which leads me to number 4. I think that Judea and Samaria, commonly called the West Bank, as well as Gaza, are probably going to be established as a Palestinian state, while what we call today Israel proper, as well as the Golan Heights, will probably be remaining, because it already is established, as the Israeli state. I think that that deal is coming down the pipeline probably in the next decade, if I had to guess. Of course, what do I know? I'm just a guy on his computer who's giving his thoughts in the microphone, right? But that is my inkling. That is what I think is going to happen. And I've been saying that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times on this program. So, if I end up being wrong about that, I guess the whole world will be able to point and laugh. But I absolutely think that's where this is going. Nor are the benefits of the Accords, back to the article, nor are the benefits of the Accords merely economic. In November, the United States, Israel, Bahrain, and the UAE conducted a joint naval exercise for the first time in the Red Sea. The same month, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz flew to Morocco to sign an agreement laying the foundation for security cooperation, intelligence sharing, and arms sales. This agreement builds on a cultural affinity between Israel and Morocco that long predated the Abraham Accords. Morocco has long boasted a tolerant attitude towards its historical Jewish population, and today, some 500,000 Israelis claim Moroccan descent. Although, to be fair, I am a Zionist. I am supportive of the state of Israel. However, Israel has somewhat of a nasty reputation of not treating African-descended Jews very well. Just being honest. Even outside of the Abraham Accords, there are remarkable political developments taking place. In another diplomatic breakthrough of the Trump administration that went almost entirely unnoticed, the rift between Qatar and its Gulf neighbors was resolved on January 4th, 2021. This years-long rupture had debilitated the Gulf states in addressing multiple regional challenges, from Libya to Iran, and its healing has allowed Qatar to play the mediator in yet another diplomatic spat, that between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And of course, I was mentioning that a little earlier when I was talking about the different people that these guys collectively hate, right? They both dislike Turkey. They both dislike Iran. The other different Gulf states also dislike Turkey and Iran. And so, of course, this is why they're deciding to be friendly with each other. The Middle East has extended just 5 years ago. The Middle East that existed. I don't know why I can't read very well. Maybe I need glasses. The Middle East that existed 5 years ago is no more. Iran's belligerence can no longer be denied. China and Russia's predatory ambitions are clear, and Israel's neighbors increasingly see that they have more interest in common with Israel than opposed. Sort of. Again, I very genuinely believe that this is co-belligerency. This is not alliance. This is not friendship. This is not healing old wounds. This is, I hate the same guys you hate, so let's be partners. All right, let's just be perfectly clear about that. If I'm wrong about that, I'm happy to be wrong about that. But I don't believe for a second that the Saudi government, that the UAE government, or that on the flip side, the Israeli government trusts any of the opposing parties involved here. I just don't buy that. The Middle East that existed, I just read that, sorry. Together, Israel and its neighbors are tackling climate, economic, and security challenges because of the Abraham Accords. And by the way, I've been telling you guys about this since the Abraham Accords were signed, right? Those of you guys who consistently watch this show know that as soon as it was signed, I was telling you this is huge. Like, this is absolutely massive. For those people who've been talking about, hey, we're going to be looking for a faux peace in the Middle East, and we're going to look at the establishment of this two-state solution, and we're going to look at everybody coming together with their whole religious gatherings in Jerusalem and all that. The start of that was the Abraham Accords. And mere months after the Abraham Accords, remember, we saw Pope Francis having an international prayer with all the different, quote, Abrahamic faiths at the Ziggurat of Ur under the name of Father Abraham. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence. The Biden administration has a choice now, and it is an easy one. The U.S. can choose to push on the open door of further regional integration by incentivizing other countries to join the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, Egypt, and Jordan in fully recognizing Israel. Climate and security challenges will be met, Iran will be deterred, and economic prosperity will increase. Or the U.S. can let this happen without us, missing the opportunity to be part of one of the greatest diplomatic achievements of a generation. And I don't think that's going to happen. Again, I think the peace plan that they're going to end up proposing and accepting is going to be a doctored version of the Trump peace plan. The Abraham Accords obviously was started by Donald Trump himself, a United States president. So will America continue to be involved in this? I think absolutely. But nonetheless, the reason we're reading this article has more to do with what's actually going on, not so much the opinion of the Hill writer who says the U.S. really needs to get on board with this. Excuse me. We got one last article for you guys today, friends, and then we are out of here. And that is just a brief reiteration of something we talked about Monday. A church leader in Israel has recently claimed that Christians are under threat in the Holy Land. Church leader claims Christians in Israel are under threat. This comes from the Christian Post. The actual article title, Jerusalem church leader says Israeli radicals are threatening Christian presence in the Old City. Oops, sorry about that. The church leader in question in particular is this gentleman right here. His name is Theophilus III, and he is the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem. And we're going to go ahead and read a little bit about what he has to say. Weeks after some church leaders in Jerusalem called for a special cultural heritage zone for Christians in Jerusalem, which we read about on Monday. If you guys are interested, check out the Monday article, or excuse me, the Monday episode. But nonetheless, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem said Israeli radical fringe groups are seeking to drive the Christian community out of the city, which he's right about, by the way. That's absolutely true. Quote, our presence in Jerusalem is under threat, end quote. Theophilus III, the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church of Jerusalem, wrote in an op-ed in the Times of London. By the way, the link to the op-ed is right here. I'll provide this in the description, and so you guys can not only read the article I'm reading, but also click on the link here to read the op-ed that he wrote as well, which I will probably actually read aloud for you guys, maybe on the Patreon, maybe this next Friday. I guess I don't know. I want to try to find different ways to incentivize my Patreon. So I might just do it on the Patreon, but we'll see. Quote, our churches are threatened by Israeli radical fringe groups. At the hands of these Zionist extremists, the Christian community in Jerusalem is suffering greatly. Our brothers and sisters are the victims of hate crimes. Our churches are regularly desecrated and vandalized. Our clergy are subject to frequent intimidation, end quote, he continued. He believes the, quote, sworn intent of these radical groups is to extinguish the light of the Christian community from the Old City, end quote. And by the way, he doesn't have to just assume that that's the case. They've outright said as much. Baruch Marzel, for example, actually, I think his name is pronounced Baruch Marzel, but nonetheless, has said that he thinks Christmas should be banned in Jerusalem, that there should be no Gentiles in Jerusalem with the exception of Noahides. And even then, he seems to waver on that idea, that Christianity itself should only be tolerated, meaning you have your rights as far as religiously, but you're not allowed to actually publicly express your religion, nor are you allowed to proselytize. And of course, he's not alone in this. Michael Ben-Ari has said famously, if you're in Israel, but probably not so famously if you live here in the States, that he finds the Christianity to be anti-Jewish. He burned a Bible once on Israeli live television, kind of just showing his disdain for Christianity, and so on and so forth. This all goes back to the radical Rabbi Mark Kahana, who was absolutely brilliant and in many ways is to be commended for his bravery in fighting for Zionism and fighting for the Jewish people. But unfortunately, he also had a very nasty feeling, if you will, a very nasty opinion about Christianity, about Messianic Jews, about Karaite Jews. And it seems that has actually bled into his followers, who are much more extreme with these sort of things than he is. For example, Meir Kahana would have said that Karaite Jews and Messianic Jews are actually still Jews. Very many people in the modern Kahanist movement would not say that. He also had said that he thought that Christians should be allowed to live with full personal rights in the land of Israel, although he did agree with the disallowing of them to proselytize, right? Nowadays, obviously, the Kahanists are very much of the opinion that the Christian church should be tolerated at best, and if not completely just done away with, right? So there's a lot of truth to what the Orthodox Patriarch, is actually communicating here. Now, of course, you guys already know what my issue is going to be here, which is that he himself is representing a very anti-Semitic group, a very, quote, pro-Palestine group, that does not believe the state of Israel should exist and has never believed the state of Israel should exist. The World Council of Churches, the Orthodox churches, the Catholic Church has, for a very long time, at this point, maintained an anti-Israel stance and a pro-Palestine stance, right? Which, of course, kind of puts us in between a rock and a hard place as the receivers of this information, right? Because on one end, if you're a Zionist, at least, if you believe in nationalism for the Jewish people, and I personally am a nationalist for all countries. I think every people's, every ethnos deserves a state in their homeland. Undoubtedly, I think that's so. But we'll probably get into that in another episode. But if you believe that, then obviously you want to fight against these people who are, have a long history of anti-Semitism in their organizations, have a long history of anti-Zionism in their organizations, have a long history of believing that the state of Israel just outright should not exist, have a long history of saying, hey, the old city should be internationalized. It shouldn't be the Israeli capital, right? And so you want to defend these Israeli people if you believe Zionism is a true and honest thing. But at the same time, if you are a Christian, or if you're just somebody who doesn't believe that other human beings should be persecuted for their religious faith, right, then you also want to back what Theophilus III is saying here, right? Because he is telling the truth. He's absolutely telling the truth. There are radical fringe groups in Israel that have a lot of political power, that have a lot of buying power, that are trying to force Christians out of the old city by buying up property, that are trying to intimidate people by acts of graffiti and vandalism, by firebombing churches and radio stations in certain instances. People have even been murdered, and the state just seemingly turns a blind eye to it, right? So Theophilus III is very, he probably didn't even have a nefarious agenda, if we're being honest, right? He's probably just worried for his congregation and his own family and friends, right? Why wouldn't he be? And he's right. So what are we to do here as the audience? To be honest, I don't really have an answer for that, because I don't trust either of the groups in question. I don't trust the current Israeli government, and I don't trust the Orthodox churches, honestly. I mean, that's where I'm at. I recognize that there is truth and that there is deceit and agenda on both sides. I recognize that both sides are probably pursuing things in a way that, at least in their own minds, is honest, and in a way that, at least in their own minds, is true. I don't think it actually is honest and true in reality, but I don't think they mean to be malicious, right? It's a complicated situation. I mean, it's a complicated situation, right? You really can't take sides, I guess, is the point I'm really trying to get down to. This is a quasi-religious conflict where both sides are honestly wrong, where one side has a very heavy anti-Zionist bent, and therefore everything they say you have to take with a grain of salt, and the other side is giving power to religious extremists who are incredibly dangerous and are persecuting not just Christians, but again, Messianic and Karaite Jews, right? And it's a very delicate situation. And to be honest with you, friends, I think it's a situation that's going to get worse. I really think it's a situation that's going to get worse. I would not be surprised if there started to be violent persecution on the regular, because there's already violent persecution, but on the regular in Israel, directed towards Messianic Jews, Karaite Jews, and Gentile Christians. I would not be surprised to see that. I would not be surprised to see, when that happens, if it happens, the Israeli government turning a blind eye and maybe even going so far as to cover it up. I don't know they would be involved in it. But I think they'd absolutely be willing to turn a blind eye. And the ultra-Orthodox sects of the government absolutely would be involved in it. Totally would be involved in it. But nonetheless, get back to the article here for a moment. The Patriarch noted that the radical groups, which are not representative of the state of Israel or the Jewish people, are seeking to occupy through illegitimate transactions 2 big buildings at the Jaffa Gate, which lies on the pilgrim route to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is said to be where Jesus' tomb was, but nobody really knows that. It may or may not be true. It's likely not true, considering the fact that the church was not built until Justinian in the 500s, but nonetheless. The church was built on the spot where both Roman Catholics and Orthodox Christians believed Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected. I guess I could have just read the article, would have told you that, right? Quote, local families who have lived here for generations will be made to feel unwelcome in their own home, and pilgrims who have longed to visit the birthplace of the Christian faith will have their experience diminished, end quote, Theophilus III warned. Quote, by working to exclude one community, the Christians, these radicals pose an existential threat not only to the Christian family, but to Jerusalem itself, a point upheld by many of our Jewish cohabitants of the Holy Land, end quote. He added, the Old City, which is part of East Jerusalem, that's not really true. The Christian Post is not being technically accurate with that. It's sort of part of East Jerusalem in the sense that when East Jerusalem was taken in 1967 during the Six-Day War, they also took East Jerusalem, also took the Old City. But in the modern day, there is typically a distinguishing between West Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, and then the Old City as a sort of third category, right? So just want to kind of point that out really quick. The Old City, which is a part of East Jerusalem that was captured by Israel, has sites sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Israel captured East Jerusalem, including the Old City, along with the West Bank, properly known as Judea and Samaria, and the Gaza Strip in 1967 in what is known as the Six-Day War. And I think that's actually the end of the article. No, there is some more down here. Did I miss something? Yes, I did, right here. Sorry. Before Christmas, the patriarchs and heads of churches in Jerusalem spoke with concern about the rising trend of violence against Christians in the Holy Land. And specifically against Christians, not against all Gentiles, but specifically against Christians. Quote, since 2012, there have been countless incidents of physical and verbal assaults against priests and other clergy, attacks on Christian churches, with holy sites regularly vandalized and desecrated, and ongoing intimidation of local Christians who simply seek to worship freely and go about their daily lives, end quote, they stated in a statement. Quote, these tactics are being used by such radical groups in a systemic attempt to drive the Christian community out of Jerusalem, and other parts of the Holy Land, end quote. And by the way, there's only like 150,000 Christians in Israel anyways. It's not like this is a very large group, which is why you don't see this happening to groups like the Druze or the Muslims, by the way, because they're a very massive minority. You see it happening to Karaites, Messianics, Gentile Christians, because these are small groups that you can actually get away with picking on. It's unfortunate, but that is definitely the way that these kinds of things work. The church leaders went on to note that while they appreciated the Israeli government's commitment, quote, to uphold a safe and secure home for Christians in the Holy Land, end quote, they believed that this commitment was being undermined by local politicians, officials, and law enforcement agencies to curb the activities of radical groups. And that's 100% true. Quote, the principle that the spiritual and cultural character of Jerusalem's distinct and historic quarters should be protected is already recognized in Israeli law with respect to the Jewish quarter, end quote, continued the Jewish leaders. The World Council of Churches Acting General Secretary, Reverend Yonah Sukkah, issued a statement in support of the patriarchs and the heads of churches in Jerusalem. And see, this is where I start to get this problem, because the World Council of Churches is, again, ever since its inception in 1948, which is the same year as Israel's inception, by the way, has been anti-Israel and has been anti-Jewish. And those are two different things, to be clear, but they have been anti-Zionist and they have been anti-Jewish, and they've been very clear with it. The World Council of Churches has never supported the Jewish people's right to exist in the state of Israel since day one, right? They've never been supportive of this kind of thing. They've always been supportive of a one-state solution, the one-state solution that's proposed in the 1980s, which was one Palestine where both Jews and Arabs could live. But they have never been supportive of this idea of Jews actually living with autonomy in their own holy land, right? And by the way, that's at very best. At worst, you've had groups saying things like, your standard protocols of Elder Zion nonsense. The Zionists are trying to take over the world and they want to expand to Greater Jerusalem. They're going to go from the Nile to the Euphrates and they're going to kill everybody. And, we all just got to worry about these dastardly Jews. And so you can see my problem, right? You can see my problem here, where we have this situation where the Israeli government is totally doing the things they're being accused of. But I don't want to be put in a situation where I am now teaming up with an organization as despicable as the World Council of Churches, which in my opinion is despicable for numerous reasons, by the way, not just their anti-Zionism, but their ecumenism, I think, is nonsense. Their liberal theology, I think, is nonsense. Their globalism and their being linked at the hip with the United Nations and other political bodies, I think, is nonsense. A lot of things about the World Council of Churches that I can't stand. But now they're the group, and these different Orthodox churches, these are the groups that are actually voicing support for these people. And again, I'd like to point out, it's not just Christians, Christian Gentiles in Israel. Messianic Jews, which is Jews who profess faith in Jesus Christ, right? They are also being highly persecuted, in fact, more so in the state of Israel. Again, they're not even legally allowed to return to the state of Israel according to the law of return. Karaite Jews, same thing. Karaite Jews are considered, because of the fact that they trace themselves patrilineally, like the Tanakh says, rather than matrilineally, like the Talmud says. Karaite Jews are said to not be Jews. Well, I mean, that's what, 20,000 Messianic Jews, 40,000 Karaite Jews, and 150,000 Gentile Christians. That's 210,000 people with no representation in the Israeli government, by the way. No seats in the Knesset, no generals in the army. They don't have any prime ministers or presidents or seats on the Supreme Court, right? No representation whatsoever. 210,000 people, 60,000 of which are Jews, who Israel is just completely disregarded. And again, it's still not even limited to them. Though not to such an extreme extent, Reform and conservative Jews have been dealing with the ultra-Orthodox community for decades now, not being able to have their marriages recognized by the state, not being able to have their children immigrate to the country, not being able to have the conversions to Judaism through Reformed or conservative circles be counted as legit. Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing problem. But nobody's decided to attack this problem, because the only people who ever do attack this problem are anti-Zionists, like the World Council of Churches or like the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO. But this is kind of the reason I keep talking about this, actually. If we don't talk about this stuff, if we don't stand up for our Karaite and Messianic and Christian brothers, then those are the people who are going to take command here. And they have nefarious agendas, right? It's kind of like if we didn't get to West Germany first, the Soviets would have, right? And sure, we all want the Nazis to be defeated, but do we really want West Germany to fall into the hands of the Soviets? I don't think we do. I don't think we do. Same thing going on here. Quote, recognizing the gravity of the threat accelerating the already tragically steep decline in the Christian presence, the WCC strongly supports the church leaders' call for an urgent dialogue with the political authorities of Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, with a view to addressing the challenges posed by radical groups and to protecting and supporting the Christian community, end quote, Sukkah said. I think it's actually Sauka. During the Christmas season, Israel faced allegations of discrimination for not easing a travel ban for Christian pilgrims seeking to visit the country. While Israel, eased a restriction on travel bans due to the Omicron variant of COVID-19 for Jewish individuals seeking the birthright program, they maintained the ban for non-Jewish Christian pilgrims, and of course, that's where they get the claims of discrimination. Now, how is something like this to be solved? I don't really know, but I have an idea. And run with me here for a minute. I think personally that it would behoove the United States to strike some kind of a deal with the Israeli government where we would support fully their sovereignty over Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Temple Mount, over Judea and Samaria, over the Gaza Strip and the Golan Heights, and where we would support fully any military operation that they decide to do, not in the sense that we're paying for it, but in the sense that it's like, hey, we back you. So, hey, you need to deal with Hamas, you need to deal with Iran. If Russia decides to get involved, we'll tell Russia to take a hike, right? But in return for us doing this, we want Karaites and Messianics recognized as Jews, okay? We want a guarantee that there will not be a temple built on the Temple Mount and that the Dome of the Rock will not be destroyed. And we want a guarantee that all Christian, Muslim, Druze, or otherwise religious pilgrims will have the right to not only live in your country, but also, of course, those who live outside to take pilgrimage to your country. Israel would absolutely take that deal. They would absolutely take that deal, right? If we told them, look, you got full sovereignty over the land, we'll back you. We just need full guarantees. And if that means you got to tell the ultra-Orthodox to take a hike, then that's what you got to do. But full guarantees of the liberties for Christians living in Israel, Messianic Jews to be recognized as Jews, Karaite Jews to be recognized as Jews, the Temple Mount not remaining as the status quo as it is today, although Jews should be allowed to ascend to pray at least, right? If we can get these, and of course, protection for pilgrims, if we can get these guarantees, full reign, do what you see fit to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to Iran. Israel would take that yesterday. In fact, Israel would take that yesterday if I made a caveat to it. By the way, we're gonna cut off all foreign aid. That's part of this deal, right? They'd still be like, down. Like, you get to let me finally deal with Iran. I've been hamstrung dealing with Iran for the last 40 years, 50 years. You're gonna let me deal with this? Yeah. Come on, Messianics and Karaites. Y'all are my pals. Come to the Pesach dinner with me. You know what I'm saying? Like, they would be too down. They would be too down. Is anybody going to make this kind of a deal? I don't know. I think this is a kind of deal that could appeal to all parties. It would appeal to the Christians of every flavor, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant. It would appeal to the Messianics and Karaites. It would appeal to the racial groups like B'nai Israel and Beta Israel and all those other groups. It would even, I think, appeal to the ultra-Orthodox and the Kahanists because, hey, you get sovereignty over the Temple Mount, over Jerusalem, over Judea and Samaria. And I don't know. That's my plan. I think that would be a good idea. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below if you're watching this after the fact, which you probably are because I'm about to end. But that's what I think would be a good plan. It's kind of like a combination of the Kahanist model for Israel with the Hebraist model for Israel, which is the model that basically sees Israel as a Hebrew republic, right? Meaning for the Hebrew peoples, not necessarily for a Jewish religion. I think that would work. But nonetheless, let me know what you guys think. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our episode for today. I want to briefly address this question because it's an important question considering what we were just talking about. Does the World Council of Churches speak up for Christians in China? The answer to that question is no. No, they do not. And the reason that they do not, Sandy C., is because the Roman Catholic Church in 2018, September of 2018, signed what is known as the Sino-Vatican Provisional Agreement, which basically, to be very short and sweet with it, allowed the Chinese government to vet the different bishops appointed in the land of China and to edit the Bible such that nothing that was contradictory to communist propaganda was allowed therein. The Pope agreed to this. Now, where does this come into the World Council of Churches? Well, in the same year, 2018, the World Council of Churches and the Pope, to celebrate the 70-year anniversary of the World Council of Churches, had communion with each other. If you're a Christian, you know exactly what communion means, right? You are now considering yourself of one body. So where the Church of Rome goes, the World Council follows. And where the World Council goes, the Church of Rome follows. And actually, I don't know if you're a frequent watcher of this or not, Sandy C., but if you are, that's something I frequently talk about here on this program. So, or if you're not, rather, that's something I frequently talk about here on this program. So if you're interested, definitely consider sticking around. By the way, thank you for being here. I do recognize you from the other channel. But nonetheless, friends, that is everything that we have for today. Kind of a somber day today. Not a lot of good news stories, but nonetheless, things that do need to be communicated. If you liked this program, please do remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. We try to go live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with virtually no success so far, but with the Lord's help, we will eventually have success here, right? But definitely hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Get this shared out to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. Of course, what good is a message without an audience to hear it? While you're in the business of getting to different social media platforms, please do consider getting an account with some of the alternative social media platforms like Gab, Parler, Minds. Also, if you like this content, please consider following us at the Synagogue on Rumble. I say a lot of things on this show, the Watchdog, that YouTube isn't particularly fond of. And so while my apologetics work will probably be on YouTube for a long time, the political work that I do, probably not so long, right? So definitely consider going to Rumble, creating an account there, not only to help fight back against the big tech overlords, but also to support me in the event that I will end up losing this channel, which will likely happen. We don't post live there, but I do post all of my videos after the fact on Rumble. So you can definitely watch them there. I do have a Patreon and a PayPal. And by the way, on that note, Sandy, yes, I did receive your Patreon contribution, and thank you very much for that. Which allows me to, I guess, get right into what I am saying here, right? Anybody here who is wanting to help me turn this into a career, who thinks that this content is worth it, who thinks that I am providing news that is worthy of being discussed, please do consider, please do consider actually contributing either through the Patreon or the PayPal. Sorry, I'm trying to find my PayPal link, but it's not actually letting me at the moment. But yeah, you obviously do so with trepidation, right? Only if you think that the content that I am providing here is actually worth it. If you do think this content is worth it, then definitely do please consider, joining with us by either contributing to the Patreon or to the PayPal if you can't contribute in a way that is committal, right? Because obviously Patreon is a subscription-based service. But nonetheless, friends, I certainly do appreciate anybody who is here. I think that's about everything that we have today. I'm not going to be able to get the PayPal link, but nonetheless, it doesn't really matter that much, right? Thank you guys very much for being here. I want to remind you guys that this show is exclusively on the Synagogue News, where we like to remind you to think like a Neanderthal. Excuse me. I want to encourage you to be watchdogs with me as this world continues to go to hell in a handbasket. And I want to ask you guys the question, as I always do. In the face of Armageddon, which I believe we are in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise